Is Russia continuing its attempts to advance outside of Avdiivka, but are Russian commanders using out-of-date maps? I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. It's November 9th, 2023. This is your daily Ukraine update. Let's get into it. Okay, first taking a look at the control map. There's been one significant change to control here, and you can see it's outside of Krasnodarivka. You've got Russian forces making advances again over what looks like about a 500 meters square here, advancing through this windbreak here and this windbreak here, and it's kind of sort of if you squint in the correct direction, but not really. It's not really facilitating the encirclement efforts that Russia actually wants to apply to the town of Avdiivka. Instead, it's kind of moving them, maybe sort of putting more pressure on Stepova, possibly. But honestly, I think this is, again, a case study in just Russian forces occupying territory for the sake of occupying territory. I really feel like Russian forces are trying to achieve a couple of things. They're trying to show their higher command that their offensive efforts aren't totally wasted. And so they're trying to show that they are taking territory, even if it's territory that literally is on the road to no man's land. I mean, you can see here that other than this like rail line that leads kind of towards these towns, they're not really advancing in the right direction. And again, they really want to apply pressure to these Ukrainian defenders in Avdiivka, and they just can't do it. The other thing, of course, that their units may be judged or graded on their ability to conduct these advances, especially if the rumors are true, Storm-Z convict units who may receive bonuses or other compensation if they are part of successful assaults that result in seizing territory. Of course, the problem with that incentive structure is that you actually incentivize Russian forces to seek out poorly defended Ukrainian territory and advance into it. But poorly defended territory is often poorly defended because it doesn't pose a tactical risk if it's lost. And that's almost certainly the case with just seizing these sort of big open fields. You can see also, I mean, there's some meaningful advances here as they move from this contested windbreak, and they have seized the entire windbreak. That's significant, right? It's on the road to Stepova. It's the last covered and concealed, or one of the last covered and concealed positions before you get to the town of Stepova, and that is something that's worth expressing, some level of concern about. But again, the largest share of territory, again, is valueless, operationally valueless. And given the incredible burn rate of Russian forces in Avdiivka, which, frankly, guys, if you've seen any of the combat footage coming out of Avdiivka, you know that it's absolutely madness. It's a tremendous volume of Russian firepower that they've put into this. And if you want to take a look at my analysis of that footage, it's going to drop today on combatvetnews.com. This is my premium site. It's my basically Patreon equivalent. Every Tuesday and every Thursday, I take the most viral combat footage from that week, and we do a deep dive analysis. We try to pin down the location, units, equipment, tactics, everything that gives us unvarnished, unspun insight into the battlefield. We're doing it not just for Ukraine, but I also try to do the Hamas-Israel conflict as well. So I try to pick like one viral video from each conflict and do that analysis. This is the best way to support the channel. Any one of these tiers is going to get you access. Of course, I have nothing but love for the lieutenant and the colonel tiers that really support what I do. I work really hard to keep the bias out of it, but covering this conflict, right, it doesn't exactly have sponsors coming out of the woodwork. So I rely on you guys, and I appreciate you for your support. Okay, taking a look at the combat map, you can see Russian forces actually almost doubling their attacks, 57 attacks across the front lines, with a concentration really along this eastern front. A lot of fighting, interestingly, inside this Avdiivka cauldron, right? You can see them really trying to put the squeeze on Avdiivka, which makes it all the stranger when you see their advances here in this, like, between Kepamik and Stepova, right? It's just not really looking like they're achieving what they want to achieve here. You also have similar offensive work in Bakhmut, probably likely a stalling effort or trying to build momentum in and around this Berkiva reservoir. We saw a couple days ago that Russian forces have advanced potentially as far as this Berkiva reservoir here. But they probably wish they could generate some real combat momentum, but it's just not something that's possible in this conflict, right? There's just defensive operations, defensive tactics have just become too good. Now, let's talk a little bit about what I thought was really significant. According to some Russian mill bloggers, Russian commanders, these are higher level commanders they're talking about, might be making these operational and tactical decisions using maps of the battlefield that differ from reality. A Russian mill blogger claimed that the Russian general staff, this is like not quite the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, but think like CENTCOM, right? They use battlefield maps that differ significantly from the tactical reality. And this was a response to another mill blogger who questioned why Russian forces weren't striking supposedly large Ukrainian force concentrations that were close to the front line. Russian mill bloggers said that Russian personnel on the front have access to the, quote, real maps, and that Russian commanders order Russian forces to conduct assaults routinely to make gains that make the fake maps look like the real ones. A separate mill blogger claimed that there had been previous individual cases of Russian battalion and regiment level assault operations aimed at making the inaccurate maps of the front line real through some serious questionable assaults. But that, the mill blogger is saying that Russian commanders are incentivized to make these gains. Now, if you've ever served in the military, you know this is exactly this feels so believable. And here's why. It's because when you have this hierarchy, right? What's the number one most important thing you can do to get promoted in the military? Have your boss like you. And what does your boss like to hear? Good news. What does your boss not like to hear? Bad news. So what are you going to bring your boss? You're going to bring your boss the good news, and you're going to downplay or ignore the bad news. And here's the problem with the military. Every time you go up the chain of command, the exact same incentive structure exists. My squad leaders don't want to give me bad news, right? I didn't want to tell my company commander bad news about what was happening in my sector of the battlefield. My company commander didn't want to tell his battalion commander bad news. But here's the problem with war. You don't always get a choice. In fact, where do you put your best commanders? You put your best commanders at your most dangerous areas of the front, where the fighting's the hardest, where it's the most demanding of the commander's tactical brilliance. But where are you most likely to experience battlefield failures? At those points. So what happens? Well, you have these higher commanders who put their best commanders, and remember, best commanders are the ones they like, i.e. the ones who give them only good news. And when you put the commanders that give you only good news at the worst sectors of the front, where the bad news is most likely to come out of, the end result is that your perception and reality diverge and diverge and diverge, right? And the U.S. is guilty of it. In Afghanistan, every single year, the pictures that the U.S. military painted about the state of the Afghan security forces was better and better and better. The U.S. was like, every year, the Afghan security forces are getting better and better. There's more of them. They're more trained. By the end, the Afghan security forces were on paper like the 10th largest army in the world. But on the ground, the reality was that they were maybe a fifth of the size of that, maybe a 10th, right? We used to see they used to send us in 2010, 2011, the rosters of the Afghan police that were supposedly showing up every day to work at these police stations. You'd have 200 police assigned to these stations. When we would get there, we'd find less than 10. And here's the problem. I would put it in my reports, but when they aggregated them, people would say, well, it was just a light shift. It was just a light shift. They'll show up. Some of them were on leave. And they would hand wave it away. Commanders would say, I don't worry about this. Which means that the number being reported to the Pentagon was that there were 200 police at that station when there was never a 20th of it. And the result, of course, was that the decision makers in the Pentagon truly believed that they were winning the war, that the Afghan army was huge, that they just had to solve a couple of logistics problems, and they would be smooth sailing to beat the Taliban. So the disconnect, the longer a war goes on and the worse it goes, the more leadership gets disconnected from reality by their own people. And look no further than the mill bloggers. Those real maps, guys, those real maps the Russians are using, do you know what they probably are? They're probably these maps. It's probably the deep state map, guys. And the reason is because how would it be possible? There's no possible way, unless they were looking at open source maps, that the average Russian company commander or battalion commander would have a more accurate picture than the Kremlin. How could a company commander, let's say outside of, let's say in Krasnohorivka, how could he possibly have an accurate picture of the battlefield outside of Svatova? Right? There's no way they could get that information. The only people who are receiving information from across the front line are Russian high command. So the only way is if you have access to open source data that's scrupulously reported. So it might be this map or a similar mapping service creating these very granular, detailed looks at who is controlling what and where. The problem is, of course, if you have something like the Rybar maps, right, in Ukraine, let's see if we can find Rybar's most recent map. This looks like November 6th to 7th. Let's see if it'll let me view in Telegram. Nope, it hates me. I can't, well, here, I'll show you what I'm trying to see. You see here, it's like view in Telegram, and then it's like download Telegram. I'm not downloading Telegram, guys. The point is that these very high-res Rybar maps oftentimes look incorrect. I don't know how else to tell it to you. They're just straight not right. And they become increasingly disconnected from anything resembling, reality. And when you make decisions, as we saw in the Pentagon, when you make decisions that don't have anything to do with reality, the result is that the decisions make less and less and less and less sense. And guys, that is how you lose a war. I can tell you, I served in a war that frankly the U.S. did not win. Anyway, that's all I had, guys. Thank you so much, as always, to our Colonel tier members. I really couldn't do it without you guys. Thanks to our Lieutenant tier members supporting the channel, being the alpha chads that you are, and to everybody that supports me on Combat Vet News. I'll see you when I drop the video later today. Hit like and subscribe. See ya.